coordinated this workshop arising out of the conference in 2016, Afro-Asia conference, where a number of us were trying to look at what happens in the southern Indian Ocean, because the way that the literature, as well as in some of the discussion, was that things were happening either in North Africa or in Asia or in Southern Africa, but there was this gap between Southern Africa and the North. And while we were talking about it, there were some things that were happening, but we didn't quite understand what was happening there, and there's sort of a disconnect. While we understood that there were researchers doing various kinds of studies, pieces of work, the exact connections as to why we talk about Afro-Asia were not very apparent. And so some of us who were quite interested in, not just in music, but what else travels through the southern Indian Ocean. And we broadly defined, just to get to a definition of what that might be, without getting into any territorial boundaries, we largely talk about it as the Mascarene Islands, that's Mauritius, Seychelles, all the islands in the Indian Ocean, Madagascar, the East Coast, and going into the interior. This is quite important, as I will try to tell you a little later. And of course, Southern Africa going up the West Coast. And then the possible links between that with Europe and with Latin America. So that's, the Southern Indian Ocean is that part. If we can imagine, I would have a nice photograph up here, you can see, we don't have that. And what we were concerned with was how to demonstrate these connections between these places. There are lots of cities, there are lots of ports, there's a huge big island that could be a continent on its own, there's a number of smaller islands, there's an interior, there are large places in the interior, and it has a history that goes back thousands of years. And how to conceptualize this, how to think about it. And largely we thought about it as not trying to describe either civilizations or empires. Try to look at it through either what I began to call as polities, and drawing from a literature that deals with world history. I'm not going to go into all these debates about what happens in world history literature, but there are two important things that in which they deal with everything from band organization to empire. They simply call it polities. Why? Because there's some form of authority, and that authority has some sort of boundary over which they control either people, goods, what goes in, what comes out, who does what. There may be forms of hierarchy. There's rituals attached to it. Basically, people live there. And that these polities are also where are the connecting points, the points through which people are connected to other places. The other one that I consequently drew from, or at least I drew from, was the notion of civilizations as unstable, disharmonious, and conflict-ridden. And so that's to get away from the idea, because when you're reading the literature, people talk about the Swahili civilization as if there was such a homogeneous thing. Just simply a set of places along the coast of east coast of Africa, and it traded, people there traded either as cities or as groups of people and so on with other parts of the world. And connected to that are other civilizations. And there are different conceptions of these civilizations. Some would talk about Islamic civilization. Others talk about the Chinese civilization, which of course is vast and very discontinuous, and in other parts of the world. But what was important about that was that within a civilization there are conflicts. These conflicts represent different interests, and it's those interests that must come to the fore when one is dealing with how these points of connection make meaning for people. So with that set of ideas, we organized this very, well, what started off as a small conception of a workshop. We thought that maybe 15, maybe 20 people would come. It eventually expanded, and there were, we thought that we would have maybe 6 or 7 papers. It turned out that there were 14 papers that were delivered in 2 days from all the countries that I've mentioned that comprise the Southern Indian Ocean, including Zimbabwe. Many of these are students at universities, and many of them are scholars at them. I would have shown you the list of them, but let me just see if I can just mention something. So we had Njabulo Chipangura from Wits University, but it's actually from the National Museum in Zimbabwe. Narcis Mahumana from the University of Eduardo Motlanthe. Many of them from that university, 2 from Madagascar. And then we had from Tanzania, but 2 others, one from Europe. I can just get his name. Kaveh Yazdani, and then Pedro Machado from Indiana University, who have been part of these discussions for quite some time. So, 14 papers in 2 days were given. We had 2 discussants. One was George Obungu from University of Mauritius and Kenya, and Shadrach Chikirure from UCT. These are both archaeologists but also historians, and they know a lot about the last millennium. And so we had papers which dealt with things that went back a couple of centuries, about the 12th century, and we had papers which dealt with very contemporary things, such as Arab music influence in Mozambique. So it was a wide range. We had a literary specialist who dealt with novels of mobility in the Indian Ocean. So it pretty much reflects the kind of things that we've been doing in Afro-Asia, in the kinds of presentations that people need. So some of the key ideas that came out of this. The first paper dealt with the connections between the interior and the coast, and it's about mining. I'll come back to this question of mining a little later on, but about what commodities left Africa, this whole big wide area of the Southern Indian Ocean, and what came in a short while. But what is very important about the papers that dealt with the border areas, or what we currently have as border areas between, say, Tanzania and Mozambique, between Mozambique and Zimbabwe and South Africa, was that when you start to look back in time, these borders don't have a lot of meaning. Urban settlements, particularly when you're dealing with mining trade or the output of mining, move along a number of smaller settlements, a number of smaller polities, of which we know very little about. But of which we do know, these are the connecting points to the sea. So there's a suggestion that you can't understand Great Zimbabwe, Makumbukwe, a whole of the interior civilizations without understanding these connections. Because that was the trade. These are the connecting points that made the trade that gave rise, or in part explained, why Great Zimbabwe is called Great Zimbabwe, or why the Zimbabwe complex. And it shifts the focus away from the question of, which has occupied the mind of some archaeologists, particularly in the 80s, 90s, well, even up to now, which tend to see Great Zimbabwe as a kind of civilization with a class-based society, with somebody sitting right at the top and controlling all the gold. What is being suggested is that maybe they didn't actually control the gold in formal sense, but there were some other means by which they did. And part of how they did that had to do with perhaps controlling the trade or controlling the towns outside the mining. So in fact, to understand this complex, you have to understand a lot more. And part of the research that is being suggested is that that is precisely what has to be done. So while the archaeologists can do all that, there were suggestions also that in order to do that, you have to get to the oral history, you have to get to the linguistic history. And you could do this also through music. Begin to understand how, if there were any musical instruments, what were they and how could they be played. And that would, you could take any musical instruments, glass beads, the kind of architecture that they had, the spatial dimensions of the houses, whatever it was, to begin to try and grapple with what this set of interconnections were. And in fact, there was a lot of debate about this. There was a debate about where these research sites were. Should you use ethnography? What other kinds of archives? How do we get at the languages? What will the linguists do? And what precisely are we going to be researching? So there was a considerable amount of debate around that. Just to go back to this question of what was traded, there were three major kinds of commodities that you could think of. Gold was one, ivory was another, and slaves was the other. There was some cloth, there was also sets of ideas, belief systems, forms of cultural contact, which one still has to explore. But each of these commodities occur at particular periods. They don't all occur at the same time. So gold was one, of course, gold. Actually, when you look at the history within Afro-Asia, gold is important, but silver sometimes is more important. So why was gold? And that tells you a little bit about why archaeologists, within a particular frame, particular set of framing questions, thought gold was very important. Perhaps it wasn't important. Perhaps ore was more important. No, iron ore was more important. Perhaps slaves, perhaps silver, which came from other places, was important. So we have to try to begin, so there's a lot of debate of how do you make the correspondence between the type of commodity and the type of policies that existed. The forms of culture that emerged out of that. And then there were a whole set of other categories of people that were being talked about. Traders, of course, but bankers. Who bankrolled these? Who were the financiers? What kind of intellectual cosmology was evolved in order to make sense of the kinds of, what we don't even know, what kinds of hierarchies came to be. So there was a debate around how we do that. Can we do that? Should we do that? And how to relate that to things like various aesthetic styles of plot, architectural styles, cultural expressions, what is the role of gender in that, how do we deal with issues around trust and reciprocity. There was a lot of those questions came up both from the discussants and from the floor. There were a set of issues that were raised that were not dealt with in any great detail. So environmental issues came up, for those that are interested in that. They were really interested in things, it arose in this very specific way. It arose out of a paper which dealt with the currents in the Mozambique Channel and what types of ships were able to sail in which waters. Schooners could travel in some and dhows in others. This was very important. The types of winds, where were you sailing to? What kinds of products were you getting from there and where were you taking them? So these are like crucial issues and people couldn't answer them. But it arose out of that kind of questioning that one of the colleagues in Madagascar was trying to address. And then out of that was that if you were doing trade, what kinds of rights were embedded in the kinds of contracts that you were doing? How were you constructing these contracts? On what basis? Who was part of those? Who was excluded? These became kinds of issues, and people talked about it. One person said this was about democracy and accountability before modern democracy. So democracy before democracy was a kind of issue. In the more detailed discussions about where people were presenting more or less case studies, particularly the colleagues in Mozambique, they were quite interested in key kinds of social structures that we understand both sociologically and demographically. What were the household structures? What were the family structures? How do we get to know about those kinds of information? How do we understand those changes over time? And with that, of course, gender configurations were raised. Forms of political association. What kinds of associations were they? Who made decisions? What were the divisions of labor? If there was leadership, what were the successions? So these were very crucial kinds of questions that were being asked about a period that stretches over 1,000 years. Or in terms of the conference, actually, they were talking about, our colleagues in Mozambique insisted on it starting in 200 AD and ending in 2000. So we're talking about very long periods of time. And given that this is only 2 days, we're only beginning to tap into the larger issues of how do we conceptualize both continuities and the discontinuities that must have existed. There was some debate about how we use the conceptual tools that we have currently, whether these are too Eurocentric, too much having to do with a particular location in Europe or in America, and not sufficiently located within the southern Indian Ocean. And then towards not towards the end, this always came up, virtually every single paper. How do you conceive of these research projects? And how do you implement? And so what came out of this was that very strong suggestion that there had to be between 5 and 7 research sites located all over the southern Indian Ocean. These had to be in Madagascar, in Mauritius, in Kenya, Tanzania, and 3 dealing with the border areas of Tanzania, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa. These were projects that were conceived of, and they were saying things like you had to deal with contemporary, the oral history of the past, and the archaeology. You needed linguists, archaeologists, sociologists, archivists, a whole range of disciplinary speciality. There was some discussion about how some people had already started certain projects which were located outside some of the main towns that currently exist, and therefore were not precisely where the archaeological sites were, and how do you connect these? Because the argument that would have been forcefully presented by some of the archaeologists in Mozambique, or 1 or 2 of them, saying that the archaeology of Mozambique is going to depend heavily on ethnography. You have to do the ethnography in order to also do the archaeology. Because I think I can understand why, they are arguing that you won't be able to understand the archaeology sufficiently if you don't understand what the oral history and what the contemporary is like. It was in the end agreed that one should attempt to try and secure funding for all 7 sites. Because if you started off with the idea that the southern Indian Ocean was connected to the other civilizations, other trade routes, it would be misleading to try and do 1 or 2 in order to be able to connect with that well-developed northern research. One had to begin almost immediately with all of these simultaneously. So that was the idea. The reality is that a quick calculation with some of the archaeologists and some of the other researchers put the figures somewhere in the region of between 30 and 40 billion rand. Yeah? I was looking at him and then he covered his face like this. And that's because it would require fairly long-term, not long-term, an archaeological dig can be 2 weeks to a whole year, but ethnography could be over a period of time. But this would require a number of different disciplines at one site or at several sites working through this. So there was a bit of tension around how to conceive that, because these have methodological and financial implications about how you construct such a project. It was then left to 2 or 3 of us to explore the funding terrain, which we are now doing. And I think I better leave it there, because it's not neither promising nor not promising. It's kind of just started. But what I do want to say is that a couple of side issues. The conference or the workshop was held at the Matola site. Anybody say older than 40? Remember what the Matola site is? The Matola site was one of those places that the SANDF bombed and basically killed the safe houses that the ANC had set up in Maputo. And so the conference was at that site. It's quite a moving site. It's, well, almost typically South African, mainly, I guess, designed by South, but it's there. It's quite new. The speeches by Samora Machel that are on display are quite powerful, pledging allegiance to the liberation struggle, the final liberation struggle, as they would put it. So it was there. But they also took us to other sites in Mozambique. It was extremely well organized. The hotel was great. The places that we went to eat at were great. Very good. I've got a nice photograph here. Anybody wants to come and see? They are rather long and large. Langoustines, lobsters, shrimps, mussels. And pineapple. On the Costa del Sol, it was great. They organized it. They picked us up from the airport on time. The money was extremely well spent. And they organized everything. Those of us that were there didn't have to lift a finger. And so, all credit to them. The Director General of the Institute for Culture that opened this, Philemon Mechels, was a former student at Wits University, so those of us that had been to Wits, or are still currently at Wits, he was very, very accommodating. And stressed again that this kind of cooperation is the continuation of the cooperation for liberation. And he had a lot to say in the conference. Trained as a political scientist. He was very on the ball. The Mozambican hosts were absolutely great. I need to thank them every time.